Welcome everyone to Politically High Tech. This is episode 197. This is the random one third. And trust me, I have to put this one random. Yeah, this could have fit into politics and law, but it wouldn't feel right. It just wouldn't. It's like me listening to a podcast without audio. How you do that? You can't. Okay, you want to see the visuals? It may look like me. I'm McCracken Poston Jr. Will look, we will look crazy to you. Why did mouse move? Something like that. Uncensored version. I know it's creepy. I'm haunting your ears for a little bit. Before I butcher this, I have a guest here who has dealt with an interesting case, and he does got a political background, by the way. He does have a political background. And you know what they say? Some things, I think I need to make this up. I think some losses could turn into a blessing. I'm going to let the guest explain why. Because sometimes it takes, one door closes, the other one opens. Okay? That's the only thing I'm going to do. I'm going to let McCracken just explain away, introduce yourself, and let's see where it goes from here. It's a very interesting case, so pay attention.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm McCracken Poston Jr., and I have a book coming out. I don't know when your episode drops, but my book will be launched at the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library next week, which will be February the 20th. It's been a date that was on my contract with my publisher, Citadel, out of New York, which is Kensington, for now almost 2 years, and I can't believe it's on us already. So I'm very excited. As I was telling you in advance, I've gotten to come to New York a few times on this book project, meeting with my agent and then meeting with Michaela Hamilton at Citadel. And Citadel is an imprint, they call it, of the Kensington Publishing Corporation. And what wonderful people. In New York, I think it's fascinating. And of course, over the years, I've seen New York change so much. You and I were talking about it a minute ago. I'm from a town in Georgia, my hometown of Graysville, Georgia, population 120. So New York City is a fascinating place for me, and I'm completely taken away by it. But I settled in a town of the county seat of Catoosa County, Georgia, Ringgold, Georgia. Ringgold was named for a guy who never set foot there. He was a early penny press mass media hero as a major who died at Palo Alto, Texas, in the Mexican-American War. And just because he died and the penny press with cheap, fast news spreading was available, he got a lot of places named for him. But Ringgold is mainly known, it's in the northwest Georgia, just below Chattanooga, Tennessee. Its main claim to fame, it's where Dolly Parton got married in 1966 to her husband, Carl Dean, and they're still together. Now, 3 weeks after Dolly and Carl got their marriage license, a man named Alvin Ridley and his young fiancee, Virginia Hickey, got their marriage license. They were married in a small Baptist church in a beautiful valley we call Rabbit Valley. But within months, Virginia disappeared. She quit talking to her family. She quit showing up to things. There were some visits by her family's church, people who kind of went around visiting people who weren't showing up to church. And she seemed fine, but she didn't seem to be very willing to resume church membership at the family church. So her parents got extremely involved. They conducted a raid on the young couple's public housing apartment and for beer. Now you have to understand that this was a dry county, dry rural county that in the late 1960s. The couple was very resentful of her parents doing that. And Virginia Ridley, for the most part of 30 years, was never seen. She made her last public appearance September 15, 1970, in the Catoosa County Courthouse, appearing at the order of the judge in the case because her parents were saying he's done something with her. And they were kicking them out of public housing based on the fact that he could not produce Virginia there when people wanted to see her. So from September 15th, 1997 to September 15th, 1970 to October 4, 1997, no one saw this woman. She died that morning. And Alvin Ridley, who became my client, became the focus of a lot of speculation and a lot of conclusion jumping. Alvin was unusual. Some would say eccentric. Others would say terrifying. He was a television repairman who shuttered his business without really good reason, but he blamed it on local officials. He became very litigious, sued everybody, was countersued, and lost a van that he had, albeit temporarily. It was gone only 3 weeks. But when he got it returned, because they had messed up the process of seizing it, he refused to accept it back. So it's been slowly going into the earth and trees growing up on all the sides of it, and he still hasn't accepted it yet. So obsessed with those type of things and kind of coming up with his own law that he insisted was in place, he became quite a character in the community. But when Virginia Ridley's death was reported by him in a very flat tone, monotone voice, everyone jumped to conclusions that he must have killed her. And I was just coming off of a loss in a United States congressional race in 1996. I had been in the Georgia state legislature for 4 terms. I was still a young man. I was only 37 when I lost that race. So I was trying to put my life back together, and the book has a lot of establishing of my low point in my life. And then suddenly I have this challenge. And one thing I will say about Alvin Ridley and his wife, for every ounce of suspicion they had for local government and state government officials, they had a pound of trust in federal government officials. It's just where they focused their trust. And so there were multiple times in the book where that became evident. But one of the most, I guess, profound moments that was evident was with our congressman, the man who trounced me in my last election, contacted me wanting to talk. And I had not spoken to him since I conceded the race in November of 1996. My client was in the room at the table and kind of sat up a little straighter. Like, I thought, what is he? He thinks this call is about him somehow. I get the congressman on the phone, and the first thing he says is, keep Alvin Ridley away from my congressional offices. He's scaring the ladies there. And so I got to tell you, that inspired me. I was barely hanging on in this case because the guy was so difficult. We screamed at each other all the time. I couldn't figure out how to calm him. I accidentally learned how to calm him once when he started talking about his van again. And I would say, Alvin, or Mr. Ridley at the time, I called him, Mr. Ridley, we don't need to be talking about your van. We need to be talking about your dead wife because they're saying you killed her. And he said, well, no, we don't, because I didn't do it. And then he would immediately follow with, but they did take my van. And so, there was a logic to his reasoning, but he was so difficult at one point. He started talking about the van, and just out of exasperation, I said, oh, Lord. And Alvin immediately assumed the prayer position. And I realized, and I just continued praying my legal advice to him. And he would, at least he would listen. And so from then on, we didn't have any more yelling at each other. I also realized that Alvin was a complete gentleman around women. He had just been raised that way. And I made sure that there was somebody from the office who was female close by. He would almost be charming. It was very unusual, and it was not creepy. It was just, he just knew how to act around women. And so it was with between finding those little things, I also realized how transactional he was. And while he did not want to cooperate and help me work on his case, I realized that I could buy his attention. Now, I'm not guaranteed getting paid back. Ultimately, we settled on him giving me a security interest in the old TV shop, which had been shuttered for 15 years. So that secured me enough to where I continued to pour my own money into the case. Again, I was inspired by the congressman's challenge. I thought I have to win this case now. He might have whipped my ass in North Georgia, but I'm not going to go easily on this one. And so it allowed me, it inspired me to work with Alvin as much as I could. But at the same time, Alvin didn't trust me. He would not let me into his house. I would file motions and Alvin would file his own motions. At the beginning, he called them emotions. And so he's filing emotions, and I'm basically pulling my hair out. So it was a very unusual murder trial. He was accused of ending his wife's life by asphyxiating her. She had epilepsy. She was obviously not going to the doctor. She did for many years, though, and she was medicating. The state of Georgia put a pharmacist on the stand, one of the only town pharmacists, who said, he was the closest pharmacy and he doesn't remember ever filling a prescription. Well, thankfully, because Alvin is such a pack rat, we had all the bottles. We had years of prescription bottles for Virginia Ridley from that pharmacy. And the pharmacist, to his credit, he said, well, I've been corrected. And obviously he did. Now, I don't want to give the whole book away, but effectively, Virginia testified from the grave. She provided testimony for Alvin that did get in. Another thing that happened, because I did not have an epilepsy death to compare this to, because epilepsy, and many of your viewers know, it's a very controllable condition. We have great medications. Virginia decided one day that God was going to take care of her, and she stopped taking them. She also noted the date that she stopped taking them. And so we had years of empty prescription bottles, and then we had months of full prescription bottles, all based on that date that she decided that God was going to take care of her and she was no longer going to take her medicine. It also dispelled the state theory that Alvin did not provide her medicine. So it's an extremely unusual case. It's an extremely personal case for me because of the losses I had experienced and was going through. I even get into a good bit about my own father, who was, for the first time in my life, getting sober through this time. And I realized while writing it, all of the ways that I was affected as a child. He was a wonderful man and never a mean or vindictive or physically abusive person when drinking or not drinking, but sad. And, it can affect you as a child. And made me a bit of a micromanager and a bit unlucky in relationships, more than a bit. And I started realizing that as I wrote this book, and at age in my 60s, things began to make sense to me now. And I realized my father encouraged me to help Alvin Ridley because my dad was notorious about supporting those who were in the lower echelons of society. He was a manager in a foundry in Chattanooga. That's rough work. And so he managed a lot of people who, that's the only job they could get. And I've had a lot of people tell me how wonderful my dad was to them as an employer, as a supervisor. And, I started realizing my father's wonderful traits that I also detailed in this book.
All right. Now, I didn't want to cause any interruptions. A lot of fascinating stuff. I want to make sure the viewers, you're watching this, your eyes, this is supposed to be eye candy, or better yet, ear addiction. I want you to be addicted. Yes, take this drug. This is the only drug I approve. This podcast. Yes, I'll be a little self-serving here. This is this is not stuff you could just make up. I mean, I sure, even my great imagination, I won't be able to make up something like that. You already answered
Well,
one of my questions about how Alvin Ridley was difficult. He had to be very creative on getting his attention. He had to work around his quirks just to be put a nice word around it. They got fixated with the van, and he wanted focus. He didn't trust you. He saw you as an enemy while you was an ally. Yeah, but I mean, shoot me,
at
I would have just,
at the
well,
same
I
at
like,
the same time,
I
at the
would just
same time, I realized
lose. You can get locked up for all I care. That's all I
uh,
would have said. But that grants you patience. You were patience and creative. So
well, at the same time, I realized how transactional he was. And I started trying to take advantage of that. I would pay him to cooperate. I would pay him to let's talk about the murder case, but he would make me investigate this ancient civil litigation, and I would do it just to transactionally have his attention next time I wanted to talk about the murder case. Well, interestingly enough, the district attorney wanted to talk about the ancient litigation. And so Alvin, in making me study it and learn exactly what went down and when, he prepared me for the trial.
I think just to put it mildly, yeah, you had a very unlikely relations. Let's just say it like that.
Absolutely. And many of your listeners will relate to this, and you will identify it in the story before I did as a participant in the story. About 3 years ago, on the tip from a former juror in the case, she had become a nurse since being the juror. She asked a podcaster who was doing a podcast about this case. She said, I think Alvin may be autistic. And when he told me that, it was just like one of those scenes in a movie where reality suddenly starts hitting you in the face. And the more I read about it, I was going like, oh, very transactional. Check. Oh, flat effect vocally. Check. His emotions don't always meet the moment. Check. The very things that the state of Georgia were using against him, trying to make him out as a cold-hearted killer, were actually traits of autism. And so this inspired me. It finally formed the book in my head. And I've been doing a lot of research. There are estimated 5.5 million undiagnosed adults plotting out on the autism spectrum. And it's a processing issue. They are not going to react the way a neurotypical person would when the police say stop, or they start asking inquisitive questions of you, or when a judge is trying to render a judgment on you. You may seem detached, uninterested, insulting even. You're not meaning to be. It's just the way you are processing the situation at hand, including any emotional matters. Alvin cried at both of my parents' passings as if he had lost his own, and he was again. He thought the world of my father, and but it was unusual. It was like a week later, and he's inconsolable. That's autism. He kind of absorbs the emotion in a room, and he may not release then, but he's going to release at some point. And sometimes it's we're in a restaurant, and the Roberta Flack song, First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, it comes on, and he is in a puddle of tears on the table. And it's because it's a song that reminds him of his late wife. And I will say this: the autism diagnosis, which he authorized me to speak of in the book and in the community, it has helped our community embrace him, and that has been transformative. Just to see now him treated as a real kind of a person who survived something really difficult, and now the community is kinder to him as a whole. People will speak to him now. They will not react when his response to them speaking to him is not exactly what they would expect or hope to get. And there was at least one episode in the book that I hope you got to about when I was trying to get him to speak first to people. It kind of blew up in our faces.
I mean, that could be the comic relief moment, right?
There was a lot of comic relief in this book, and it's all at my expense. Everything was, and being a micromanager, I was frustrated because I could not control this guy. I couldn't get him to let me in his house for over a year. I could not get him to let me in his house, and he was letting any cop that wanted in to come inside. Come on in. When I would ask, I'll think about it. He had this very convenient reading of the U.S. Constitution that said that when he didn't feel well, he didn't have to come to court. I had to start carrying a paper copy of the U.S. Constitution and challenging him on it at every time he said it. And so it was just a 15 months of hell that ended very beautifully. And some of it just landed in our lap. Some of it some readers may think was divine intervention, God looking after one of his children that needed some assistance.
Yeah, that's one of the conclusions I got. So yeah, it had to be God. If it was normal circumstance, I think he would have been one of the statistics being locked up in jail just for being misunderstood or the system being against him.
Alvin has a very interesting relationship with God. To Alvin and Virginia, God was a hitman sometimes. They would, if ever using the Bible, they would give it up to the Lord or turn it over to the Lord. People would die in terrible ways. And I think it was a bit of reverse engineering in Alvin's mind. Somebody would slight him because he felt everybody was slighting him. And when just life happens and these people would die, Alvin would reverse engineer it in his head that, well, he gave them up to the Lord. And there was one instance where a guy that he used to work for died in a plane crash. And I said, Alvin, everybody liked that guy. He goes, oh, I loved him. And I said, but you gave him up to the Lord? And he says, well, God sometimes has his own reasons to take him out.
For some odd reason, I get it. It's hard for me. He's just this quirky person. Once you pick up the essentials, of course, reading the book is very easy to grasp that, but I could have just imagined in the moment at that time. I was like, how the hell you communicate with this weirdo?
Well, and then, of course, Jesus intervened and countermanded my legal advice. I didn't, not knowing what made Alvin tick, I thought the jurors would find it insulting if he started talking about his van on the stand in his wife's murder case. And at the last minute, Jesus appeared to him at lunch the one day that I'm not sitting across the table from him. I let him eat with another character named Salesman Sam, who you probably read about, and some church people that had started showing up at the trial. And I paid for their lunch, but I didn't want to sit with them. We had a bad morning in court. An expert that Alvin insisted that I hire turned out to be a complete disaster. Wasn't even licensed to be doing what he said he was doing. I mean, it was on me. I didn't vet the guy well enough. So Alvin tells me on the way back to court that Jesus appeared during lunch and told him to testify. Well, a defendant has a right to testify, I think, in every state and federal courts. That is fundamental. You have a right not to testify as well under Fifth Amendment. So I tried to the court gave me a little more time. We had the trial in 2 courtrooms. We started off in a small windowless courtroom. We had to move because Alvin brought cockroaches with him into court in giant suitcases where he kept all our evidence because he wouldn't trust me keeping it. And every night he would go in and reshuffle it. He would take things out that I wanted to use the next day. He would put things back in that I had not copied and given to the DA, so I couldn't really use that. So, but along with the papers every day came scores of cockroaches. This is documented on Forensic Files, season 5, episode 9, the episode titled Calligraphy. The jurors are talking about their cockroaches coming out of Alvin's suitcases. And so that was the courtroom right next to the judge's office. So the judge insisted that we change courtrooms. And I took Alvin back into the Roach courtroom to put him on the stand and show him how this could go wrong. I had kept out some material by pre-trial rulings. But if Alvin opened up and put good character into evidence just by saying things that we all say about ourselves, or I'm not that kind of person, I would never do something like that, that opens up your character for attack. And so all the things that I had kept out that were just weird and unusual, they could rush back in. But Alvin did testify, and it was the best thing ever. I let him be Alvin. I let him talk about his van. At some point I asked, why do you think your wife died? Because they took our van. It was just that kind of thing. But the jurors saw the humanity there, and although none of us could put a finger on what is it exactly about this guy, you have to know that in 1999, at this trial, the autism spectrum was relatively new. And they only talked about autism in children, and they spent a lot of time trying to blame something for it. Well, we've had autistic element of humanity since time began. Some of our greatest contributors have been autistic people, artists, scientists. There is a laser focus that they have that is unmatched by any neurotypical mind. Alvin was such a good television repairman in the old picture tube days, and he was the Zenith dealership, so that's where the name comes from of the book. And please remember, readers, this is Alvin and his fiance at the time at a local amusement park in a photo booth, and my publisher loved this picture. That shows you what I know about publishing. I was wanting a picture of a local folk artist had done. And the publisher says, no, we handle everything on the cover of the book. You handle everything on the inside of the book. And that was a good compromise. But that was from a photo booth. And there's other pictures in the book from that strip of photos that young couple in love happened to have done before Virginia decided she didn't want to be in public. Agoraphobia is what you would call it. She was worried about having seizure episodes in public. She told that was the position she took. So it was a very unusual couple, but they were very much in love. They were very much supportive of each other. Yet I forgot how literal autism made Alvin. Of course, I didn't know it was autism then, but I forgot how literal he was. So when his testimony was going very well, I got ahead of myself and I thought, I want to finish strong. And I said, Alvin, what all have you lost? And I wanted him to say, the only friend I ever had, or the best friend I ever had, or the love of my life. He said, oh, the funeral bill.
Well, just to interject real quick, I just think the jurors saw the authenticity, the realness, the charm of Alvin. So you can't fake this.
Absolutely.
So I think that if I could just try to put a finger on it.
We say down here, he was hiding his light under a bushel. He was actually a quite charming man, but he had never had a real chance to exercise it in decades because he was so wound up, with conspiracy theories. And he used to post missives on the inside of the TV shop, the shuttered, shackled, padlocked TV shop, denouncing everybody in government by name. I used to go by and read to see if I was on it when I was in elected office. And I had to confront Alvin about some things when I was in elective office. And I just was met with a blank stare. So as it turned out, at the end of the trial, Alvin was acquitted. And I would ask Alvin, why did you pick me? Because he literally stalked me until I would talk to him. Only 2 days after his wife's death. And then we finally found a way to accommodate he didn't want to make an appointment. He didn't want to come to my office until I made accommodations with him to say, look, you don't have to make an appointment. Just come by the office and I will stop and talk with you. And that seemed to make things work because then he would get riled up about something and he would come by the office. Ultimately, I was not appointed to represent him because turns out he has assets and he doesn't look like it and he doesn't live like it. But I ended up with this dilapidated TV shop. It was in such poor shape, the city tried to condemn it. And I tore it down and rebuilt a building in its place, and I named it for Alvin. It's called the Ridley Building, and it's one of the nicer buildings now in downtown Ringgold. Now has a coffee shop, and inside that coffee shop, if you're ever in Ringgold, Georgia, there is a bit of a shrine to Alvin. It's a People Magazine article, the Washington Post article, several of Virginia's writings that acquitted him. So, but I would ask Alvin, I would say, why did you pick me? What about me caused you to pick me and stalk me and get me to help you? Which was tenuous at first, at best. He said, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you one day. Well, he brings to my office this old, worn out VHS cassette. And on it are the label had been partially ripped away, and there was that kind of papery residue underneath that still was the label, I guess the sub label under the finished top. And on that was my name written in the distinctive hand of Virginia Ridley. And he said, you can't have it, but you can look at it. And so I popped it in the VHS player, because everybody had one in their office back then. That's how we got evidence sometimes from the state. And it was the one televised debate in my congressional race in 1996. And he said, she always liked you. Well, that is the ultimate compliment, even though I pointed out she didn't register and she didn't vote.
That would have been nice.
That would have been nice, even though it wouldn't have made much of a difference in my race. I was trounced.
Yeah, I'll tell you, this listeners and viewers, what did I tell you? This is something that you just can't make up.
Well, the all of the spoken testimony in the book is directly from trial transcript. I wanted to be absolutely true to the trial. Of course, I couldn't put all witnesses up, and I couldn't put all testimony in, but what's in there is absolute truth. And of course, there were all kind of notes that I had that I could fill in what was happening. For example, here's some notes of, I'm taking down what a witness is saying, and then I'm writing, stop shaking the change in your pocket. And I'm showing Alvin that because he's making a lot of noise shaking the change in his pocket. It sounded like $28 in coin in his pocket. And then he would start writing, and he would write really hard, and it would be completely distracting to the jury. They had their eyes on him the whole time. And of course, they saw the roaches escaping from the suitcases and me trying to stomp them, or I would pick up a bunch of paper and they would come scattering down. One fell on my tie and scampered off to the floor. And it was a wild experience that, again, I'm not exaggerating. You could watch the Forensic File episodes and hear the jurors talking about the roaches.
I'm telling you, if they could, this could be a great case-based movie. I'm telling you, this is something that I think they should just make this to a movie.
Well, interestingly enough, about 20 years ago, I had a case right before Alvin's, and it involved a trailer park knife fight. And I was appointed to that defendant. And at some point at the end of that case, at the end of both cases, actually, the office of documentarian Rory Kennedy reached out to my office. Well, my family were big Kennedy fans from the 60s and, on up. So I felt a real honor that Rory Kennedy's office would be calling me. Well, it was her staff, actually, and they were just trying to find out what happened to that first case. And I said, what is Rory Kennedy's interest in the first case? She did a documentary called American Hollow about a Kentucky family in Appalachia. I'm in the southern Appalachians. These folks are up in the real hills, as we call them, in eastern Kentucky. And there was a bad guy in that documentary, and you really didn't see him much, but you saw his wake. A lot of domestic violence, like a hammer or a bat through a TV screen, and that kind of stuff that they documented so well. Well, that was my client in Georgia of the first case. And so when I started calling her back, Rory Kennedy thought, oh no, this guy's in my documentary, his lawyer's calling. So she put me off. I was really just calling back for her staff calling me. But to her credit, at the end, when she got the film in the can and off to the film festival, she called me back. And I said, well, I was just going to tell you what happened in that case. And she said, well, we found out. And we had a nice conversation. Well, before you know it, we're talking about Alvin Ridley case. And she said, my husband is a writer and he would love to talk to you about this. Well, Mark Bailey, who ended up being one of the most wonderful people I've ever met, he wrote a screenplay about this case that I've never read. I knew that he and Hollywood were going to take liberties with the story. Mark would tease me about it. He would say, well, you're a woman now. And you know, just drive me crazy. But he sold it to New Line Cinema. And I retained literary rights in the deal. But New Line was experiencing some problems and the administration kind of, nosedived. And they were replaced by a new administration who then thought this was, a tainted green light from the previous administration. So it never went anywhere. So, but I had retained literary rights, and I used I used the same title that I had given Mark, Zenith Man. Now, interestingly enough, there's another Zenith Man book available online. It's a short story, but it's our story. Our names are different and the place is different. And it drove me crazy at first, but I had been giving this story away to TV shows and podcasts and NPR Snap Judgment, A&E's American Justice, Forensic Files, People Magazine. I'd been giving this story away, so I can't really blame somebody for wanting to write it. I just wanted them to tell this is based on a real case. And ultimately they did. But I want to give credit to this author for getting me off my ass, or I should say, putting me on my ass to write. And thanks to that inspiration, I really became consumed with writing this story. Now, that and Alvin's autism diagnosis, because now I could explain him. And now I could go back and think of all the hell we went through, and it had an explanation. This is why he was so transactional. This is why he had such a flat effect of his voice. This is why his emotions did not always meet the moment. And the very things that were being used against him in the trial could all be explained by a lifetime of being on the autistic spectrum. Alvin's fourth grade teacher told me, she's no longer with us, but she told me at the time of the trial, he cried every day of fourth grade. He was picked on. He was, ridiculed, and the cruel things that kids do to each other. Alvin seems to just remember those as if they happened yesterday, but not in a sad way. He tells me how he got them back. I'm really glad that none of this came out at trial. One guy, he plunged a giant needle of like a pin from a dress shop into the guy's arm, into the bone. And the guy is like 80 and lives in Knoxville, Tennessee. And he called me and confirmed the story. And, it's just kids getting rough with each other. Another one, Alvin whacked in the head with a broom for stealing his hat. But Alvin tells it like these are fresh insults. And I'd say, well, when did that happen, Alvin? And he'd say, oh, I don't know, in school. But he's acting like it's a, unfinished business still. And so I feel blessed to have been in a position to help Alvin Ridley. I feel blessed to have figured out a way to work with him, not knowing what his issues were. This case and a lot that happened after that loss of that congressional race made me realize the value of unanswered prayers. All the things I was asking for that didn't come through put me on the path to fatherhood, where I worked out a lot of demons. Being a father, a very hyper attentive father, micromanaging, but always at my children's events. And that's something that I did not have as a child. I had a wonderful father, provided for 6 kids and a mother, a stay-at-home mom. But when he was not at work, he was drunk. most of that time. And it ends well for my father, and this was happening right at the time of this trial. So I had those kind of things going on. And, a couple of reviewers have said, I'm not that interested hearing about the author. But when you write, if you're writing something that affected you, you have to tell your arc. Another reviewer said, I sure would have enjoyed less from the author and more from Alvin's point of view. Well, I don't know how in the hell I could have written Alvin's point of view. I would have to, I would have to
record him.
yeah, yeah, and from Alvin's point of view,
with the boundaries of law, use
we did not know he was autistic. None of us knew. He didn't know, and so I don't know how I could have written it from Alvin's point of view. But
now there's an AI tool now, so you just get a sample of Alvin's voice, and then they go.
Oh my gosh! Well. Yeah, that's going to be the end of all of us, I'm afraid. So, I've already dealt with AI already. The minute, about a week after my book went on pre-sale on Amazon, another book popped up called Summary of Zenith Man, Death, Love, and Redemption in a Georgia Courtroom by McCracken Poston by this other band's name. And I called my publisher and I said, okay, we're not even starting copy editing yet. How in the hell is somebody summarizing my book? Turned out it was a AI written fraud out of Nigeria that was selling for $4.99. I'm a realist. I have friends and family who would have opted for the $4.99 summary. So I had to take that out and managed to take it down from all sites. I should have bought one just to have, but I didn't want them to benefit from this and the confusion. And when I finally Rakuten, it's kind of the East Asian Amazon, Rakuten opened up the book for me and let me see. And in this book, it was page after page after page of just generic courtroom scenes. And my name in the book was Rebecca Mitchell.
Oh, that might give you said about the one. Oh, you're a woman on one of them. There you go.
Yeah. So you can imagine, it's
I was frustrated. Yeah, with AI, and I did talked about this before a couple of episodes. That that copywriting is going to be one of the big issues that AI is going to have to deal with, and this is going on. I mean, New York Times is already suing ChatGPT for improper citation, all of that. So this is just the beginning of onslaught of problems that AI is doing. I think AI is a great tool, but it's definitely perfect, and we have to contain its advancements. It's advancing too quickly.
It was in the news the other day, a lawyer filing what looked like a very professional brief in the case. The court, as a federal court, I believe, had its clerk investigated. The cases were made up. The cases, the citations, the numbers. The lawyer pled ignorance, like, well, I just told it to, do research on these issues, and it came out with this product that looked extremely professional and like, man, I'm going to win this case. And it ended up being totally fraudulent. So the human factor, I think, is got to be there for a while. And like you said, the copyright issues alone are going to be horrific. It's now on our screens constantly, and I'm doing a lot of promotion for the book. And at one point, one of the social media says, let AI rewrite this. And it was pretty amazing because it was getting things about the case from other sources, things that I had not written in the input. So, I was impressed and frightened by it at the same time.
Oh yeah, no, understandable. So you actually answered a lot of my questions that I have, so I'm not going to bother answering them. You already touched on some little bit of personal history, and of course, they already assumed that he was a murderer, even though there was no evidence, just because he was very aloof, socially inept, eccentric, doesn't communicate in a very normal and expected fashion. And then you already gave some of the preparations. Well, actually, was more interested in how you dealt with this insane trial.
Well, I did want to tell you that
tribulation he had to deal with. So
I was from the very start. Alvin explained to me his wife's epilepsy. And obviously, she was not medicating. He said that was something that God told her to do. But that date that she wrote that God told her to stop taking her medicine in September of 1977. The medicine bottles in the house, because they never threw anything away, they were empty up to that point. And for several months after that point, they were full. And this medicine was now 20 years in those bottles. And yet it showed that she took it to heart when God told her to stop taking medicine. Now, because people do well medicating, there's not a lot of epilepsy deaths that I could look to, that I could compare the autopsy of Virginia Ridley to. And then out of the blue, September of 1998, we're weeks off from the trial, the Olympic track star Florence Griffith Joyner passes. I didn't think anything of it. I had actually seen her at the Atlanta Olympics. She was not competing, but I saw her in 96 because she was, the greatest female athlete. And the next month, in October of 1998, her autopsy was news. And the autopsy was that she died of a seizure disorder. Well, there was a seizure death. And by Monday, I was talking to the doctor in Orange County, California, who autopsied her. And her autopsy was very similar to the markings on her body were very similar to those on Virginia Ridley. And, she got a first class autopsy because she was a very well-known, very talented athlete who died an untimely death. And so she got a first class autopsy. Georgia's autopsy was a little cut a lot of corners. And I have great admiration for the doctor that did it. Now we fought like crazy in this trial. It was probably the longest cross-examination I've ever done of anyone. And he went on to distinguish himself in great ways. Up in Pennsylvania, he was the forensic pathologist in charge in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, when the 9/11 plane went down in the field. He was in charge of that site. He also distinguished himself during COVID up there. But he's back in Georgia now and retired and back in Georgia. And he and I have talked about this case. I think he would say today that he was influenced by the public rumor mill. When the body was delivered to him, he was told, this woman has been locked in a basement for 30 years. So it was easy to think, well, I'm sure this is asphyxiation now. If somebody was going to lock her in a basement for 30 years, that's probably what happened to her. And so the state's case was affected by this rumor that even Virginia's parents stopped seeking her. But when she died, she had family that continued the allegations and the rumor mills and the outright accusations. Now, were they entitled to do that? Yes. If one of my sisters disappeared, I would have probably raised more hell than they did. But her family did raise hell over the years, and Virginia wrote about it. She wrote about having to talk to another sheriff about, she's okay. She wants to be where she wants to be, where she is. So we just didn't know that. And by the time 1997 came around, very few people in town knew she ever existed because generations had passed by. So I understand her family, and my heart goes out to them in terms of not having communication with her. But that was clearly her choice. And for whatever reason, she felt she didn't want to have anything else to do with him.
Yeah, no, I can understand why it was assumed that she was killed, in prison in a basement against her will. I mean, if you haven't seen her, you would have thought she disappeared, killed, whatever. Even though people should be spreading rumors, but that's what people are gonna do. That's just
every time. I'm really glad that this case didn't happen during social media age.
Forget. I was gonna just add the social media stuff. All the conspiracy theories and misinformation. Some of it would have flipped it. Oh, maybe it's one of the family members that did. You know how wild it could get.
Yeah, it gets crazy.
Yeah, no, yeah. Social media is good in some ways. It's also horrendous in some ways. They're good at blurring between truth and fantasy. Well, AI could do better. Well, AI will just amplify that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know listeners, you're gonna call me out, say, I'm normally pro AI, but I gotta be real too. I'm a cautious optimist. That's the camp I fall in. That means even though I am optimistic about AI and its positive impacts, but I am aware of the potential or even some of the negative impacts we're dealing with right now. Like,
I want to let your listeners know if they get the book and like it. I'm very easy to find. I have several social media sites dedicated to this book. I'm easily accessible through all of them, including my email, which is online. And if you really love the book, send it to me and I'll get Alvin Ridley to sign it. He will be 82 in a few weeks.
yeah, so he's still alive
He's
today.
still alive. We go to lunch
Yep.
religiously twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. That's part of the autism, the
Oh yeah.
rigid thing.
Structured.
And sometimes my court schedule doesn't allow it, so my secretary will take him to lunch, which sometimes I think he prefers. But we try to just make sure he's okay. He's living in the same house he grew up in. When it gets extremely cold in Georgia, which it did this year, down in the teens. We're not prepared for that. Houses aren't prepared for that. So I put Alvin up in hotel for the last couple of years during those extreme cold periods, where he has hundreds of more channels of television to entertain himself with. Alvin hopes to get a couple of girlfriends out of all this fame that he's about to get, but he's obsessed with this TV show called Cheaters, and he's worried that Cheaters is going to roll up on him when he's got one girlfriend with him, and it'll be the other girlfriend that got Cheaters involved. So he's thought all of this out.
Yeah, he is quite the character. So
He's a very kind-hearted and thoughtful person. He gave me a box of Valentines to give to my girlfriend, and I thought, this is a guy who's just constantly being kind to others, and it's so sad that he didn't get that for so many years.
yeah, because the optics just looked very horrible.
If the optics were
Horrendous.
terrible, yeah, they were bad. Yeah.
That's what it boils down to. And if people don't know, people are not gonna investigate. People just gonna spread rumors. It's easy. Judge, spread rumors. It's an easy thing to do. It's a human condition, unfortunately. Especially especially you have a loved one in there, a relative who's either, I don't know, super protective, very fearful of her well-being. Of course they're gonna do that.
Well,
Probably
I
have,
want your viewers to know that there's a big part of the book that I've left out just because I want you to have some mystery.
oh,
But Virginia effectively, and I'm not going to go into it, but I just want to tease that Virginia effectively testified from the grave for her husband. And it was just fascinating. The timing of things. Sometimes I didn't know huge turns in the case until the night before I put a witness on the stand. And it is very unusual in that respect, in that I had to think fast on my feet. And with Alvin, you always have to think fast on your feet because he may decide not to come to court that day. And so, I had to accommodate for that and guard against that. So, but anyway, I really appreciate you having me on.
Oh, one more question. And I could see also redemption for you too, because you recovered for that political loss. And this is something a little bit in politics. I'm sure you got this before. Do you miss politics despite this wild ride that you went through?
I had a wonderful 4 terms in the Georgia House of Representatives. I became type 1 diabetic at age 31 while I was down there, and began using an insulin infusion pump for therapy. And many of your listeners probably have someone in their family that uses this amazing technology. But there is something about realizing your own mortality that changes you. And it changed me, and I became a Molotov cocktail throwing reformer, and which did not give me a lot of friends there, but I'm proud of what I did. I brought in Georgia's first lobbying registration and reporting Act. That was my bill. I did a lot of other reforms that still exist in Georgia law now, 30 plus years later. And, when I ran for Congress kind of on these issues, idealistically, you'd think that this, I suffered in my own politics, in my own personal politics, because nobody likes a reformer. Nobody likes a goody two shoes that's telling them what all they're doing wrong. But I suffered through it and got good legislation passed. Well, at the same time, it didn't help me in the congressional race at all. So, but I don't have any regrets. So to answer your question, there are a lot of people that I miss. But you know what? With technology, I've been on a basically 25 plus year text thread with a bunch of these former members of the legislature, former staff, and we just kind of we have a kind of a Hunger Games death notice where somebody just posts a name with nothing else around it. We know that person is dead. And it's like I said, it's like Hunger Games. You see the name up in the sky, and it's just really funny. So I'm getting all of that camaraderie still. Politics though has gotten weird.
Oh, to say the least, and more chaotic.
Much more
Nationwide,
chaotic.
stateswide. I mean, I am not gonna torture my listeners as viewers with all of that. They already know. I already beaten them to death with it verbally with those points already. So I'm pretty sure they want to hear it. I'm trying to protect you long time, loyal listeners with my regurgitations. I'm trying to look out for the first timers, not so much. I want you to suffer.
Well, I'm very, there's a lot of redemption in my book.
Yeah.
Myself, Alvin in the community, myself in my life, my father, even my former political opponent, who later went on to be our governor. And he actually is kind of one of those only Nixon could go to China situations. Only he could do criminal justice reform, because if I had been in the position of trying to do it, I would have been just castigated as, oh, there you go again, pro crime, anti rights. Only this guy could have pulled it off, and he did significant criminal justice reform that's helped a lot of convicts get their life back and not have to suffer the huge disqualifying things and the difficult things. And I give him credit in the book for going on to do that. So I like to say, former Congressman, former Governor Nathan Deal, he's redeemed as well.
And see, so that's a theme I already saw right away. Redemption. And
I hope, and by the way, I'm available through Zoom and maybe even for a visit to your book clubs and or your bookstore in your community if they will have me. That would be a fun weekend to go to a different part of the country and do a book signing and do a talk.
New Yorkers, you might be lucky, just saying.
I love coming to New York, and I
like Georgia. I've been to Georgia. I actually like the state. I like it.
It's a wonderful state. We used to actually call ourselves the Empire State after New York, the Empire State of the South. That was on our tags for many years.
Oh no, amazing. Yeah, amazing. No one had that little subconscious familiarity feel. Okay, now that explains it. When I was there only once or twice. Yeah, I actually love Georgia.
Atlanta had a wonderful history of the civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King was based there. Andrew Young was based there. Ralph David Abernathy, and the list goes on. And I feel very fortunate. I'm a white kid from a very white part of Appalachia, but I feel so fortunate to have gotten to know Ralph David Abernathy's son when he was alive. He and I served together. Got to know Dr. Martin Luther King's children and his widow. Coretta Scott King came every year for ML King Day, and that's the legislature was in session. And I tried to talk with her every time that she was at the Capitol. And then I had an interesting visit with her at the U.S. Capitol. I did not expect to see her there. I saw her there. She was a bit unguarded. And I went up and just reintroduced myself, told her, we see each other every year at the Georgia Capitol. And we had a nice conversation. And for some reason, my insulin pump started beeping, and I apologized and showed it to her. And she said, "I think have you experienced any discrimination based on that?" And I thought, no, I really haven't. And in the book, you'll see that I ultimately did. And so I just thought it was a profound kind of prophecy about people with disabilities, so I really thought a lot of Coretta Scott King and just those wonderful experiences. Now, Atlanta was called the city too busy to hate during that time because it was in this massive growth period. And I just hope that our legislature is much more diverse than it was when I was there. And that's the way it ought to be. It ought to look like Georgia. And it does more now. But again, politics has gotten so divisive, and I must say, being constantly in contact with everybody else in the world in a device you hold in your hand, that does not foster well thought out responses and reactions to things that you instantly see and instantly react to. It's gotten us all into trouble, admit it.
Yeah.
It would be better to cool off and let
Rapid fire response.
Yeah. It's not good for us.
McCracken pissed me off. It's like, I'm gonna let it have my peace of mind.
Exactly. And you'll probably get a little of that after this podcast, but it's okay. The book is about redemption, about of everybody, and I hope your listeners will give it a shot.
Listen, I already deal with a couple of hate comments. I just simply laugh at them. I say, "Yeah, I got nothing better to do." That's all. That's the reaction. Let them throw their so-called last word, because without a keyboard, without a smartphone, their brain shuts off. There you go.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on.
Yep. Oh, let me do a shameless plug before you go. I know we've been dragging. Not I'm dragging. Not for me. No, your story's been great. I don't give that impression that was what. This has been a fascinating story. Very fascinating. And with some historical connections, which I'm not surprised. So, my lovely listeners or viewers, go to his website, get that book. Get that lovely book. And trust me,
it's available on all booksellers' websites. Again, it's the one with my client kissing his fiance back in 1965 in a photo booth. That's the cover of the Zenith Man that you want.
Yep, and the publishers were wise to have that photo of the front cover.
Absolutely.
So I'm happy that you drop your micromanagement tendencies at least on that moment.
I'm learning.
At least at that moment, with the case and all that, I say, yeah, I'll just follow this. He's a lawyer. I'm not. Let me shut up.
It's exhausting. It's totally exhausting to be this way, but it's ingrained in me from childhood. It's how you handle things as childhood. I want to keep everything smooth. I want to keep everything even keeled. No. A kid will blame themselves for their parents' problems.
Yep.
And so but the bottom line is my father was a wonderful man with a really bad problem, and but he's redeemed in the end as well.
And absolutely, yeah. We are not defined by our problems, and I think that's one takeaway from this. And people could be redeemed as long as they want to go, through it. If you want to go through redemption, and then that's when you're unredeemed. That's my only thing I have to say about that. So you could communicate with him. He's easy to talk to. He's on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. I refuse to call it X. TikTok and Instagram. Most importantly, check that site. Get that book. It is a case like no other. Okay, and trust me, he's been generous giving those details. I could have just come say, is that potential spoiler? But no, I'm trying not to be a micromanager. I mean, you probably told me I do have micromanager tendencies sometimes if I see that the situation demands. But normally, if things are going well, I'm just gonna just chill and relax.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I'm not trying to make myself the perfect, but if I see my leadership is needed, then I'm going to do that. And some people don't like it. I say, oh well, things wasn't taken care of, so I got. Oh well.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
No, I thank you for providing such a great story. Not forget story. A tale, a piece of history. This is why we need to be educated. This is why we need to learn about each other more. You'd be surprised. And why this person may seem rude or cold or detached or just nasty, odd, awkward, what have you. And it's a story of redemption. You could be redeemed, as well. So you got to go through trials and tribulations to be redeemed. Let's just be clear, because we humans can be really, really stubborn. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So before I wrap this up, I have to do the normal social media thing. Eyes roll. Like, comment, subscribe for YouTube or follow for Rumble, share. And and another thing about the listeners who decides to go through Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a star review. And if for Apple for podcasts only, you give a star review less than 5. I like to know the reason why. And then if I get a 5-star, it's optional just to give you reasons for a 5-star.
Oh, and I would be remiss. Please review my book. If you've read it, please review it, and your listeners, please review my book. That is as with you, that is the mother's milk for later success. That's how you get more listeners, and that's how I would get more readers.
And look at that. He's 64 years young, but he understands tech and the internet pretty well. So let's not have any ageist commentary either. This is coming from a millennial who stereotypically supposed to be against his generation, just showing verbal, electronic pitchforks or what have you, just because millennial versus boomer thing. It's idiotic. Stop listening to social media. It's killing your brain cells. All right. Enough of me.
Thank you, man.
No, not a problem. So for whenever you listen to this podcast, you have a blessed day, afternoon, or night.